Hello, everyone. Anything to anybody?
Hello.
Black culture, it goes right back to the Great Society, 1964.
Yep,
Lyndon B. Johnson.
exactly.
That
So,
was the death of the black family.
in the beginning of the Great Society,
Yeah, well, black families used to have back in the 1940s, 50s, black society, they had like an 80% marriage rate.
mm,
But after the Great Society, I think 80% of children are born out of wedlock in the black community now.
there,
80%.
there you go.
So it's gone
Yeah,
180 degrees, literally.
that's all you need to know.
And you see it even in you see it. This is why I don't call it black culture. I call it ghetto culture because it's not just blacks, it's whites, it's Hispanics, Asia, it's everybody. It's literally it's a ghetto culture where people think it's okay to have three babies with three different people. I mean, and they go around acting like a bunch of gorillas, where they just
Yeah,
uncultured, uncivilized. Which is, hey, that's how it was back in the caveman days, right? They didn't come out and say, "Sir, do you have any Grey Poupon?"
yeah. If you saw something, you just took it, and if there wasn't the head of the pride or whatever you call it in the animal kingdom, the big ass male lion who was big enough and strong enough to stand up and stop it, if that wasn't there, that's it.
And that's where we're going back to, right?
Gosh, I hope not.
Well, look at our society.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I'm just saying that
Like you were coming out of the McDonald's parking lot the other day, and
it's a regression.
you were driving properly, and
Yeah,
the bozo on the other end looked at you like,
yeah,
how dare you get in my way?
yeah. I had the right of way. I was in
And when the government does UBI, think of the next two steps after that. Okay,
Oh,
UBI is introduced. What happens next?
it's pretty scary. It's a site. Yeah,
Economically, not
yeah,
socially.
yeah.
Economically, what happens next?
It, well, it's a cycle that goes down the toilet. I guess they got to print more money, right? And perpetuate and speed up the devaluation process, which
Well, we've seen it already
right,
many
100%.
times.
Yeah,
So when you give everybody $1,000 a month,
yeah,
that $1,000 a month now becomes worthless.
exactly. Yeah, your purchasing power gets less. So it's like to
Now a
put it
loaf of bread is $100.
to put it in financial terms, if for those out there that do charting and technical analysis, it's the Contango effect. It's a downward ski slope.
The people who are in power now, they got there through hook or by crook, but they're there, and they're not going to let go. People can think elections are going to make a difference. Nope, nope. They'll use violence, they'll use coercion, they'll use the media. They're not going to give up their power, but they're going to be the ones who decide. Okay, we're going to roll out the UBI, and they're going to call it universal, Dan, but it's not going to be universal. It's going to be to whoever they decide gets it. So what does that mean? That means that the people that they decide coming in who will, go along with their program, they're going to get the $1,000 a month, and you and I aren't. So I wouldn't want their money anyways. But here's the problem: that's going to raise so that $1,000, it's going to raise the the low end of life to $1,000. You now need $1,000 just to cover the bread, the basics. So, but if you're not getting that thousand, it's got to come out of your pocket. So now what they did is they just moved you. They basically increased the size of the lowest income level in the country because all they did is they moved you down to the lower level. They didn't move the other people up. They moved you down. Does that make sense? I look at the USD to Mexican peso, and then I look at a couple other pesos currencies around the world because it gives you a sense of what the US dollar is doing.
Yeah, you told me that. Yeah, that's a
And
good
then
idea.
I and then
Yeah,
I look at the DXY, When I first started coming to Mexico, it was roughly 10 or 12 pesos to $1. So what that means is the peso had a little bit of strength, right? It wasn't 1,000 to 1.
Right.
In September of 2014, it started going up around 20 in 2017. So what does that mean? It went from 12 to 20 pesos for $1. So what does that mean?
Yeah. So the peso, comparatively speaking, right, got crushed against the dollar, right?
It basically lost what, 60% of its value?
2/3, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. And then in 2020, it got up to 25. The DXY does
Yep.
not indicate how strong the dollar is.
Yeah. Yeah. You need to look at exchanges, foreign exchange rates.
So,
Yeah.
and when I came back in October of last year, the peso was over 20. Today, it is at 17.76, 1776.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
so basically, that sounds like nothing, but what it means is anybody transacting in Mexico
Mhm.
has gotten 10% stronger against the US dollar in the last 6 months.
Purchasing power. Yeah.
So how did we see that? Well, companies who operate in Mexico, their expenses are now going higher, as we saw with some of the miners. So some of these miners had record costs because now they're paying, the local currencies are getting that much more expensive against the dollar.
Mm-hmm.
So it decreases their profits.
Yep. Squeezes the profit margin.
Yep. All these parts, I mean, a lot of car parts are made in Mexico. So now all those car
Absolutely.
parts are 10, 20% higher in cost than they were.
So I agree with you that you always want to have a macro view, at least initially, and then maybe look at it from like a funnel down perspective, right? Because it's a macro view that's going to give you some of the stuff that you just talked about. Yeah.
And you also
I
see
agree.
what countries are, like Lebanon had a currency crisis 2 years ago where it just went hockey stick. Argentina, which is a perennial
Yeah.
currency loser
Constant. Yeah.
over the last 40 years,
Mm-hmm.
in the last month, their currency has devalued 10% in just 1 month.
That's amazing.
Just 1 month. And in 1 year, it's gone down 55% against the dollar.
So if, when the dollar loses its status, and it's a matter of time, we just don't know exactly when. I think it'll be within
It's
10 years.
happening. No.
No, it's happening right now. I get that.
No, it has nothing to do with what the official declaration is. But when people start shifting away from using it,
Absolutely.
this is why everything's expensive now compared to what it was. It's already
Okay.
happening.
Powell announced a 25 basis point increase in interest rates. And so now what?
And he's not done. He's not done, despite what the market thinks.
We've got 2 or 3 big events coming up in the next month or so. One is on May 15th, a huge, I guess, interest payment at a macro level, interest payment on the debt. Then there's the debt ceiling thing to deal with on June 1st.
Okay, we lost Dan. My guess is, I'll bet you he didn't even plug in the computer. That's my guess. This guy's unbelievable.
Sorry.
I mean, it's always something with you, man. The IT professional always has computer problems.
Inspector Clouseau strikes again.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
I know.
We both have our own routines. Like I said, how I start in the morning is I check, because still, whether we agree with it or not, the US dollar still drives markets.
100%. No doubt.
So that's why I look at it, and interest rates as well.
Yeah, in our market. So my approach is similar in that it starts high level, more of a macro look. I look at the 3 or 4 major markets the first thing in the morning. I look at the Dow, the S&P, the Nasdaq, the Russell. I look at gold, silver, and or crypto. Just glance at them. Are they up or are they down?
Mhm.
In terms before the market starts, the futures, are they green or are they red? Right?
Mhm.
Based on that, then it gives me an inference as to when the market does officially open at whatever 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. Then it
Yeah,
gives
you know where it's trending. Yeah.
exactly gives me an inference is it going to trend down and then bounce, or is it going to gap up or whatever, right? Because of everything you just said, Dave. The dollar is ultimately driving the world, because in conjunction with that, our markets are still, at least right now, the biggest markets in the world, right? And so, we're the biggest, whatever, boat still in the water that raises and lowers the tide, at least right
Well,
now.
habits. You know how it is. I mean, when you're in a when a system is set up, when the habits are formed,
Yeah,
they work until they don't.
right. So we talked about the markets here, right? And so the Dow, what did the Dow and the S&P and the Nasdaq and all that do this week? I mean, in general, we agree, particularly yesterday, right?
It was a wild week.
It
It
was a
was a
wild
wild
week,
week.
but it ended, on fire yesterday, right? Everything was pretty much up yesterday. I mean,
Well,
it was
let's rephrase that, Dan. Okay. It actually I'm pretty sure it was down on the week and it was up yesterday because it had during the middle of the week there were 2 days where it got pummeled.
exactly right. Friday though was incredible. I mean, the S&P ended up 1.85, the Dow 165, the Nasdaq 225, the
What are
Russell
you
at
talking about? You're talking
239.
percentages?
Yeah, percentages when they closed yesterday. Oil closed crude at
Well, this is what
403.
yeah,
Wow.
this is what I will say is it
Wow.
was a Friday. It was a Friday. This is
Yeah.
what the powers do on Fridays is
Mhm.
if you go back and you look at Fridays are usually green,
Mhm.
okay, because they want you going into the weekend happy and spending money,
Yeah.
okay, and but I still contend that one of these weekends, that's when the rug pull will happen on a weekend because there's nothing you can do about it, and and the
Yeah.
other thing is is this is the type of market where somebody will be like, okay, wow, look at that euphoria. I'm going to jump in. And then
Mhm.
Monday it will gap down 20%. And all those people will be trapped on an island.
Yeah. Well,
That's coming. That is coming at some point, whether it's this week, next week, in the next couple of weeks. That's, I think, a good chance of that happening
you think it's
because
going to be a massive gap down? Yeah. Yeah. Could be. Yeah.
well, what would I say this all the time? Why would anybody think anything positive in our markets right now? I
Well,
mean,
yeah. I mean,
do you think the banks are safe? Do you think our financial system is solvent?
yeah. I mean, if you're just blindly following the narrative, the answer is yes. So just using the S&P as an example to Dave's point, guys, um, looking at the max view here, um, starting from 2009, because this is the trend that's been running since then. 20, we know what happened there. This massive drop off, right? Went right off the cliff. And then, of course, the Fed jumped in. And I'm not complaining, but the Fed jumped in at that point to save the day. And what's
Oh,
interesting is,
they didn't jump in 2008 and 2009.
of Of course they did. I'm just citing that specific example. What's interesting is here, when I circle this, look what it ended up creating
Well,
ultimately.
the reason everybody's seeing prices rise, like you know how we started the conversation with UBI.
Yeah.
Well, what they did in 2020 and 2021, that was UBI.
Hmm.
That was UBI.
A
Getting
form
a
of
check.
absolutely.
Okay, it basically ingested drugs straight into the blood system.
So this uptrend to me goes since 2009. The bull has kept running, and whenever the bull slowed down, like what I circled here, for example, and he started to lose, steam, we just pumped heroin directly into his veins so that he could keep running again. So, but what I
And as we talked about before, what does our country have to show for it versus a country like China?
like zero, nothing, because the problem is we do export actually a lot.
Warren Buffett has a lot to show for it.
Here's the problem, guys. To Dave's point, I want to get back to this thing I circled, but we still export a lot. We do, in terms of basic materials, agriculture stuff, raw materials, etc. But the problem is,
You know what one of the largest exports now is? Human blood.
okay, so I think we're one of the biggest exporters, if not still the biggest exporter in the world. But here's the problem: we import at the end of the day. What you were implicitly getting at, Dave, we import at the end of the day more than we export. So we are a net importer. And on top of that, we don't produce anything. That's why we import more, right? That's a problem. That's a problem. When we lose the world reserve currency, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, that's
Well,
not
a country like ours could not. The reason that there'll be a war before whoever controls our system allows it, they won't willingly, because if we had to go back on the gold standard, we would immediately become overnight would be a third world country, overnight, because
yeah.
all that gold would be shipped away within a month. That's what happens when you import more than you export. You have to basically give you whatever your ballast is. That's what regulates your currency.
So basically,
and you have to basically pay these people off.
So to your point, instead of issuing treasury bonds and notes and stuff, what we do, and fueling essentially our lifestyle and whole economy with debt, you've got to pay up front, lock, stock, and barrel with gold. And upon doing that,
you have to settle at some time. Maybe it's quarterly, maybe it's monthly. Who knows?
Yeah. But basically, you're paying lock, stock, and barrel up front, more or less.
And when it was the gold standard, literally, they would transfer gold from country to country.
100%. And when it was the gold standard, you had to budget. You had to live within your means. That's just the way it was. It forced you to look at your balance sheet and income statements, if you will, I should say, on a monthly basis. Is what I'm bringing in greater than my expenses? Well, that's not the case anymore. It hasn't been since, I think, the 70s or early 80s. We've been clearly, our expense part of the income statement has been clearly much bigger than, the revenue part or income part, right? And that translates down not only at a macro level, at a nation level, but right down to the average American household. The average American household is in far more debt relative to their ultimate net worth and or cash flow. We know, to throw the stats out there, that 70% of the economy is driven by pure consumption. We know that. I'm not trying to be critical. When I say this to certain friends and family members,
that's why they say, go out and spend.
They literally get mad at me. Oh, you hate America, man. No, I don't. But we are a consumption nation. We don't really produce anything, yet we consume beyond our means. Okay.
Well, yeah, and think about it. If you were
do that short term, maybe intermediate term, which you could define as 50 years or 100 years, but you can't do it in perpetuity. You can't do it indefinitely. History has shown that. That's not my opinion. History has shown that. If you go back in history and study it, you'll know that this happens. We're 5% of the world's population,
Right.
and we consume 80 or 90% of the world's population.
Yeah,
World's resources, 80% plus.
So think about this. You're in a group of 10 people.
Yeah.
And there's one guy
It hogs it all.
who takes everything and leaves everybody there. I'm sure everybody's known somebody like that. At some point, somebody smack him on the head and say, "Hey, man," or they kick him out of the group.
100%. One excellent analogy, and that brings us to right here. Which Americans need to wake up. When we look at the regions of the world, and I put this section in here, I have North America, which includes, Canada, Mexico, EMEA, which is Europe, basically Central and Western Europe. I'm not really including Eastern Europe, APAC, or known as Asia Pac, Latin America, the BRICS, and then Middle East. Right now, the BRICS is really a trading union or partnership. Really, it's not really a region versus the other things. So, but I put it in here because we're alluding to this and talking about it more and more because it's becoming more and more relevant, right? Who are the BRICS guys, for those of you that aren't familiar? Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Oh, what's that? Why are these 5 countries talking? Well,
Do me a
guys,
favor, put a plus sign after that because it's going to very soon be the BRICS plus.
100%. And so this is a problem, guys, because what's happening is what Dave just alluded to is everybody's been playing under the guise in the sandbox of how the current system globally is set up with America at the top. And the Russians, for example, and the Chinese have reached a point, and it looks like Brazil's and India is in there as well, following along. But it's mainly the Russians and the Chinese leading this. And they're at the point where, and I'm not standing up for the Russians and the Chinese like some of my family members have alluded to, but put yourself in their shoes, basic human empathy. If you kept getting punched and slapped in the face over and over, and the bully out of 10 people, as Dave just said, is got 90% of the resources, eventually you're going to be like, you know what? I just don't want to be involved in this anymore. I don't want to come and play in this game anymore because I'm the one that gets the short end of the stick and poked in the eye every single time. I'm sick of the short end of the stick. I'm sick of getting poked in the eye. Okay, you're going to start thinking out of the box and you're going to be like, I need to do something. I can't go on like this. I can't live like this. This happens not only at the individual level, but it happens at the national level. And you're seeing it play out right now in real time. And I think, God forgive me, I think most Americans are effing oblivious to this, totally oblivious to this. But when this thing that's happening as we speak eventually rolls over, turns over, eventually that light switch is turned on, where this thing really kicks in, we've got a rude awakening coming. We are going to get punched in the teeth very hard, and most people are not going to be ready for it. They're not even going to understand what happened. They're going to feel the effects, but they're not going to understand what happened.
Okay, here's the difference. We've been talking about this for over 10 years, and the difference is it was probably on a trajectory like this chart. Like look at 2020. That's kind of a good analogy to what I'm about to say. So we were on this trajectory to lose it, and then 2020 comes along, or specifically 2022 came along, and now with the way that we've handled the Russian crisis with Ukraine,
weaponizing the dollar. Yep.
And we had been doing that with Iran and North Korea, but when we did it with Russia, and now we're threatening to do it with China, now the rest of the world is like, whoa.
Yeah, they're taking note. They're taking note. They're like, you know what? If the Russian, oh, by the way, and I've had arguments with other Americans, fellow Americans, and even family members that have been like, yeah, we should do that, which is what? Seize sovereign government private assets, seize private bank accounts, yachts, and everything else. Again, I'm not sticking up for the Russians, guys, not at all. But I want to be clear. When you start setting the precedent, okay, this is the problem. And apparently our leaders don't friggin' get this, okay? Because I don't know where the common sense that these guys have and women have, or lack of common sense. We set the precedent.
States has always been the bully on the block. The difference now is now China is almost a grown adult now.
100%.
Okay, they're
No
not a
doubt
little
about
kid like they used to be.
100%. 100%.
So Russia is their ally.
Yep.
Okay,
100%.
and India might be a stronger economy now than it was 30
100%.
years ago.
Yeah.
So now we have these people who actually can now stand up and say no. Before, too bad. It's like you know, you have a group of little kids you're babysitting, and they're like, I don't want to take a nap.
So
Too
basically,
bad.
so basically, the BRICS represents. I'm trying to remember the numbers. I read it the other day. The BRICS represent, and that's not the BRICS plus. The BRICS, just the 5 countries we rattled
Well,
off.
just between India and China, you have 3 million people or 3 billion people.
That represents basically 42% of the world's population. The BRICS represent almost half the world's population. And then on top of that, in terms of resources, they're representing a quarter to a third at least, particularly when you have Brazil in the mix. Why?
What do you mean? What do you mean as far as resources? As far as the resources they use or that they produce?
No, that they actually have and or produce. So, for example, Brazil's a great example. Brazil and the Russians and the Chinese are not stupid. That's why they included them in this. Okay, Brazil is a massive country. Okay, it's the biggest country in the southern hemisphere in the world. It's massive, and
It is massive.
it is rich in iron ore. It is rich in gold. It's rich in all kinds of minerals. It's rich in farmland. It's rich in livestock, cattle, you name it. They export everything.
Yep. Oil.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep. And you can argue that they have enough minerals and silver and all that too for the computer industry, for chips, all that, right? And the BRICS know this. They're not stupid. Whether you like the Chinese and the Russians, guys.
And they have the Amazon River Basin.
There you go. Whether you like these people or not, the culture, and the West keeps slapping them in the face, they're not stupid people. Because I've got firsthand experience working with Russians and Chinese people, okay? Both born here as well as not born here, okay? I've worked with these people side by side, shoulder to shoulder, and I've not only as a peer, but I've also managed teams of people like this, okay? And I can tell you, they're very hardworking, okay? They can be very hardworking, particularly the Russians, very disciplined, they're very intelligent, and that's it. I mean, they're not bozos like we make them out to be. They're not fools, okay? And they're sick of getting slapped around, and so they're forming this trade union.
We did our first video 2 weeks ago. So if you go 2 weeks ago, what was that? That was the 15th, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
So you 14 said go up. So basically, the markets bounce down, they bounce back up, they bounce down, they bounce back up. So
Yep.
we are still down. We're in a range right now. So when you're like, wow, euphoria, everything's blasting off. Not really. Not really. We're in a range.
We're chopping sideways. Yeah. Definitely.
And so, like you say, Dan always says he likes the volatility because it allows you to make money going down and it allows you to make money going up. But here's the thing. This chopping around, it's like a war, right? And it's indecision in many ways.
Yep. Yeah. Good point.
And so you have to look at it from the standpoint as to, this is the way I look at it, whether it's right or wrong. Which way are we most likely to go? I mean, if you are skewed to one side, then you might have already 80% of the move, 80% of the upside might already be into the cake. So I don't know. I mean, which one is more likely to happen, up or down? This is where people have to make their decisions. Why are you doing these line charts?
because I wanted to get back to the just so that
Will you go to candles, please? You can still do what you're doing with candles.
well, I just want people to keep in their mind without over bombardment. Just keep the shape in mind, right? I want to point this out.
Go to candles. Let's see if it changes.
Well, it won't change. It won't change.
I know that.
I just want them to keep the shape in mind because this is a classic guy's Head and Shoulders, right?
It's not a classic Head and Shoulder.
Well, not classic, but it is sort of a Head and Shoulder. You could also argue, though, starting from down here, going all the way to here, and then here, that this is one big ass bull flag too, because a bull flag tends to go up like this, then it tends to come down at a 45 a little bit before it launches off again. And there are some schools of thought that think that, this thing could launch off again and then continue.
Well, it's very simple. If you go up to indicators in the left corner and click on Fibonacci, you have what's called a retracement. And so you typically get approximately a 50% retracement.
From the high?
Now, this is where, if you go to the very bottom of 2020, what's the bottom number?
About 2,200.
And then go to the very top. Okay, so we'll just say, nice round numbers.
You're
We'll
right.
say 2,248. Add
Got
those together. What do you get? You don't need a calculator, Dan.
Yeah, I know.
Kids,
70
these kids
divided by
who
2.
can't add a nickel and a quarter.
I get it. So
10 cents.
So 3,500 is in the middle, right?
Yep, 4,800, 2,200. That's 7,000. So where's 3,500 on that chart?
Right about here.
What a shock! Look at where it hit.
Yep.
Whenever you see something go straight up or straight down,
Mm.
and it bottoms or it tops,
Mm.
go from the very bottom to the very top, go to 50%. Now, it sometimes will overshoot to 60%, or it will come up short to, I think, 41.8.
Mhm.
But if you use 50% as a nice, easy to remember number, you can pretty much know where things are going. We're in May, and what's the saying on Wall Street with May?
Sell in May.
And go away.
Sell in May and go away. Okay.
So basically, a lot of people sell, and then they come back in September and October for after Labor Day. So that's why we've talked about this. This is why you typically don't see huge crashes or huge moves in the summertime.
Yeah.
You tend to get March, April, and then the fall, the autumn, September, October, November.
Got it.
But you can see, if there's a trend, you will see it bleed out.
Okay. Good point.
But,
Excellent
but,
point.
But here's the difference, and I've been saying this ad nauseum, is it's not about us anymore. It's about Russia and China and the BRICS. When they decide it's over, it's over. And that's what we're watching. We don't have the headlines in front of us, but more and more countries are doing deals bypassing the use of the US dollar.
100%.
You agree or disagree?
No, 100%. I mean, I don't like it any more than the next guy.
Why?
But so let's not ask me the rhetorical question. Like,
well, I
why?
mean, if you were a Greek or an Italian, why would you care?
You wouldn't care, but I'm an American. Okay, so because I know what it means for our overall standing.
You're an American, so I'm not American if I'm a Mexican or Canadian or a Brazilian.
Okay, so I can't speak for them, okay, because I'm not any of them. I'm an American, and
But they're Americans too, Dan.
Oh, okay.
This is the mindset I'm trying to get Dan to. This is how you know somebody doesn't travel, when they call themselves Americans.
Okay, so that's not true. It
is.
Okay, that's a truism in your mind. I'm a North American. That's a fact. I was born in the United States of America. That's all I'm saying. Okay, so the other ancillary part of that I was trying to say is as an American, this concerns me, right? Because I realize at the big picture level what it means to all of us and the average bear in the U.S. Okay, it's a pivotal moment in time and history, AKA as well as affecting your standard of living greatly, whether you know it or not, right? A lot of Americans are going to get chop blocked, if you will, to use a football term, right at the knees, and they're going down.
They are bypassing the dollar.
I understand that.
It's not going to be this great moment where they say, today is the end of the US dollar as the world reserve currency. That's the mistake that people think, is there's going to be this grand event.
Okay, so I'm not necessarily saying that either,
You
but
are saying that.
there eventually will be, to an extent, a pull the plug moment when it is more in a bleeding fashion, to your point. I agree. But eventually we'll get to a point where it's like when something goes geometric and keeps going geometric. Eventually,
let me ask you a question.
The pull the plug moment comes.
Here's a pull the plug moment. You want to pull the plug moment? Here's a pull the plug moment. China no longer allows Apple and other. Apple's the largest company in the world, I believe.
$1 trillion market cap, etc. Right.
So they say, hey, you can't export anymore. Sorry.
Yeah, that could happen. Yeah.
You know, you need to start paying us in gold or whatever, whatever. So what happens to Apple as a computer, as a company, when they can't ship to the rest of the world from China? Or just to select friends?
Yeah, it's called a devastating moment in my simple mind. It's devastating. And then
this is a risk of owning Chinese companies.
Yeah, and then it has a ripple effect, not only with Apple, but it has a massive ripple effect for all their downstream suppliers, around the world, our economy, etc. Totally. Yeah, no, I agree. No argument.
And maybe Apple at that point says, you know what? We don't need to be in the U.S. Let's put our headquarters in Singapore or in Hong Kong.
Well, if it came down to outright survival, they absolutely would do that. They would become a multinational based, they already are, but based out of somewhere else, to your point.
Kind of like Coinbase, what they're threatening to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a government threatening to destroy the crypto industry and flush Coinbase down the toilet, Coinbase has basically two options at that point. One option is just accept it and be flushed down the toilet, or say, well, you know what, I need to survive, okay? I need to think out of the box. Maybe we don't operate in the U.S. anymore. Maybe we go to where we're respected and wanted or welcomed. Maybe we go to Switzerland. I don't know, but somewhere else, right? Or the Cayman Islands. I don't know, but out of the U.S. where they're going to take the sledgehammer and crush my skull.
Exactly. And since 2020, you're seeing people flee the United States. Even before, but especially since 2020. Now you have remote workers.
Yeah.
So what does that do, Dan? It speeds up the whole process.